Welcome everybody to number 9 in the Light at the End of the Tunnel series, which is a collaboration between Parlour and Monash Architecture. My name's Naomi Stead. I'm a professor and head of the Department of Architecture at Monash University, and convener, I guess, of this series along with Justine Clark. As always, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands upon which we are meeting today. Monash itself stands on the traditional lands of the people of the Greater Kulin Nations, and on behalf of Parlour, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country across Australia's many nations and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to the Indigenous Australians who are part of the Parlour community. As I mentioned, this is the 9th in the series Light at the End of the Tunnel, which looks into architecture as a profession, a discipline and a practice, and how it will be affected by the pandemic, and also how we're going to come out the other side. I should say that it occurs to me that the tunnel seems to be getting longer. So the light, but we were trying to focus on the light, basically. Our guests this week are our guest Sonia Sarangi. Oh my gosh, I practiced that. Sorry, Sonia. Sarangi, yes, and Alison Cleary, and our theme is mentoring. Justine will introduce our speakers more fulsomely in a moment, but first, as always, I'll talk through some protocols for the session. We ask you to please make sure your microphone is on mute unless you're actually speaking. We invite you to leave your camera on if your internet capacity allows it and if you are willing. But part of our purpose here is to come together as a community, so it is really very nice to be able to see your faces. The format is Q&A. It's meant to be informal but informative. Justine and I will ask questions to keep things flowing, but we will also take questions from the floor throughout the event. So please, in the first instance, put your question in the chat, and then we will select questions and invite that person to pose it verbally to our speakers. If you really don't want to do that, that's fine. Just note it in your question. We'll pose the question for you. Also, please feel free to make observations, set out your own experiences and put them in the chat as well. We've found that to be a kind of unexpected pleasure of this series. And we're very happy for you to share and comment and add a parallel narrative in the chat function. Obviously, please be supportive and respectful. We may not get to all of the questions that are posed. We never get to all of them, and there are some excellent questions which we haven't gotten to, but the questions you ask will help to inform the subsequent topics of subsequent sessions. Now it's my pleasure to throw to my colleague Justine Clark to introduce our speakers and the general direction of the questions.
Hi everybody, thanks Naomi.
Justine, do you want to unshare the slide?
Yep. Okay, hi everyone, thanks Naomi. As Naomi mentioned today, we're looking at mentoring, and this is probably one of the areas that we get the most inquiries about at Parlour. We don't currently have a mentoring program. We've thought about it, but we're certainly interested to investigate more about how we can leverage the networks that Parlour has created to support people to develop mentoring relationships. We're probably not in a position to run a full mentoring program. Also, at the moment, there are a number of other groups investigating mentoring possibilities too, and we'll look at opportunities to collaborate. So it seems like a good time to discuss this in this event format, and in fact Sonia suggested it to me and I thought it was a great idea, and here we are. The joys of this series is that we can be very responsive. So our speakers today have got a great mix of experiences to help us think through the possibilities of mentoring. Both have set up and run mentoring programs and are also experienced mentors and maybe mentees. I don't know, I haven't asked them that. So every week I say that our speakers are friends of Parlour, and this week it is even more true than usual. It's always true, but I think we're very fortunate to have such fabulous friends who can help us with so many of these things that we want to discuss. So to introduce our speakers today, Sonia Sarangi is a Melbourne architect. She's the director of Atelier Red and Black, a mother of 2. She also teaches at the University of Melbourne at the MSD in architectural practice and Asia Pacific modernism. Red and Black set up its own mentoring program, Preparing for Practice, a few years ago, and I think that's been an incredibly successful program and very generous, I think, of a pretty small practice to set up a mentoring program for others. And Sonia also participates in the Institute mentoring programs. And I would say, I think one of the things that characterises Red and Black as a practice is this great generosity that you both have to participating in the architectural community in all kinds of ways. So we're very happy that Parlour is one of the places that you participate. Sonia's joined by Alison Cleary. Alison, I checked out her Marion's list. I've known Alison for a long time, but I thought I'd see how she describes herself. A broad-based management communications and advocacy specialist with a passion for problem solving and facilitating positive change. We're very lucky Alison's joined Parlour as a director. But many of you will know her as the previous chapter manager of the Victorian chapter of the Australian Institute of Architects, and in that capacity she ran the constructive mentoring program and was also a mentor herself within that program. Alison just brings this extraordinary mix of knowledge and experience and capacity to get things done, and I think we're very lucky that she has continued to be part of the architectural community after leaving the Institute. We're very happy to have you with us, Alison. So that's us. Let's get started. I thought we might just start with quite a simple outline of the kind of mentoring programs that you have each been involved with. You've both been involved in setting up and running programs, and I wondered if you, but they're quite different programs, and I wondered if you could each tell us a little bit about those.
I'll go first. Yeah. Okay. So I actually, prior to being at the Institute, I was involved in shaping a mentoring program in the corporate world for Census, who are the publishers of the white pages. I don't even know if that happens anymore. I went in as a consultant to do that in 2000. So I've been involved in mentoring since then. That was a very structured module-based mentoring program, internally mentoring program within Census, which at that time had 20,000 employees or something across Australia and the Pacific. My role in that was around developing the materials and the modules themselves, not actually doing the program. When I joined the Institute, there was the constructive mentoring program had actually been going for 1 or 2 years at that time. I reshaped that. The premise behind that program had actually come from, I think it was the NAWIC, National Association of Women in Construction, had a mentoring program which the Institute had initially been part of, but it hadn't been responsive in the way that the Institute had identified they needed a mentoring program. So we took that on and developed it further. At that point, we identified, and I think that the mentoring programs are still running through the Institute. I don't know what form they're in anymore. But at the time it was identified, and I held to this for the time I was there. I was with the Institute from 2010 to 2017. At that point it was a gendered program, so it was for women. It was for women, both female graduates and also women returning to the workforce, because it was identified then that was a key need and a key gap within the profession, that traditionally there were a lot of mentoring paths and career paths for men, and that women tended to miss out on the opportunity to get mentored or to identify good mentors. So we took that program. We changed it several times in terms of its format. The idea was that it paired up, it was both informal and formal, so there are a couple of formal components to it, but a lot of it was informal. At the beginning of the period, 12 months, we paired up mentees with mentors. We initially only called for female mentors from within the profession, but one of the issues was we actually had difficulty over a number of years in getting enough mentors for the demand if we were just going out to women with experience in the profession. So we extended it and brought in some male mentors. And it was a combination of formal and informal mentoring, basically. And the idea was it went for 12 months. And then if the relationship between the mentor and the mentee continued, that was good, but it was no longer part of the program. So then we would then do a whole new intake the following year. Yeah, and we provided manuals and support. I was the key for the time I was there. I tended to run the program because I had the experience in mentoring. I would often take on mentees myself. So I was a mentor, I think, every year for 1 or 2 people during that program as well. So, yeah.
Great. Sonia, tell us about your program.
Sure. I'm going to start and say that the true architect of our mentoring program is actually my co-director, Michael, who's in the audience here. He was involved with the National Committee for Gender Equity at the Institute, and Parla had blazed onto this scene. So the other credit, 50% for this program, actually goes to Parla. You brought our attention to the fact that the attrition starts as soon as we leave architecture school. And that was a sucker punch, along with a lot of other things that Parla uncovered. But that was astonishing to us. And I still remember, we were chatting over coffee one morning, and we were reflecting on how our first year of practice was so different from what the impressions of practice are. And then similarly, the first year of working in the profession is so different to the reality of what you think you are. And we felt that the biggest chasm is from when you are a student to when you are a part of the profession. And so we felt that why should everyone have to go through their own trial of fire to learn the lessons that we eventually do? Why not make a dent in that attrition and share the learnings that we've won the hard way, and warn people about a lot of the pitfalls that happen in those early years. And so that's kind of where it really began. And now listening to Alison talk, I realized we kind of maybe subconsciously took some of the structure of the CMP program, because even our program has always been some facilitated meetings and some one-on-one meetings. So our program every year, we felt we would be able to genuinely connect and give and create an impact to 6 people. That's what we felt we could mentally deal with as 2 directors. So every year it would be 6 students we would take on from their final year of architecture school. That was our criteria. Catch them before they actually leave school. And then we consciously made the decision to limit it to just female architecture students. We would have 3 formal meetings dealing with 3 very broad topics. And then in between those 3 formal sessions, we would have individual one-on-one coffee catch-ups to deal with their more specific and personal and sort of the questions that you don't want to talk about in a big panel. So that's how we kind of structured it. And like Alison said, some of those mentoring relationships are still ongoing today, in the sense of, we get a phone call or an email out of the blue. And some of them, they've filled their cup, they feel ready, and they've gone out there, and we're so happy for them.
So how long has that been running now?
5 years, I think.
And I know you, a couple of years ago, I think Michael wrote a piece encouraging other practices to take this on. Do you know of any other practices that have doing something similar? Or?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Michael's received 2 emails at most. One email from another practice, I think maybe up in Queensland. That's it.
Okay.
And this is in spite of the fact that Michael and I get around a lot in the architecture community.
Yes, I mean, quite a few practices seem to be interested in setting up mentoring programs within their own practice. But the idea that you do it for those who aren't your employees is quite extraordinary. Have you looked at, so you and Michael are the mentors,
Actually, for the past 2 years, we've also had Sally Holbrook from Northbourne Architecture. We know Sally through many other ways, but also through ArchTeam. And she has always also been interested in mentoring. And one thing led to another, and she's also one of our mentors now.
Oh, great. Okay, because I guess where I'm going with this is, as Alison said, one of the problems often is getting enough people to be mentors. From what I understand, this is a very normal problem. There's usually a lot of people who want to be mentored, and it's always hard to find enough people to do that mentoring. And I wondered if you might each reflect a little bit on the benefits of being a mentor, because I think, you know, in that context, people always say, oh, you know, both people get something out of it, but I wonder if you might want to talk more directly from your own experiences, but also, I guess, more broadly about what you see the benefits of being a mentor might be.
Alison, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I've been a mentor on and off for various people over the years. Some it's been a formal mentoring relationship, some it's been quite an informal one. The thing for me that I've always enjoyed about being a mentor is, I don't think of a mentoring relationship as you know, I'm the font of wisdom on the hill, come and sit at my feet and I will give you the secrets of life. It's, you know, I will give you, you know, you ask me a question, I'll tell you how I dealt with it. If that works for you, it does, and it doesn't. So one of the things I love about mentoring is the challenge, because I've always had a life which is, my work has always been around engaging in other people's realities. So I get opportunities to see how the rest of the world operates. And being a mentor does that in a very, very direct and very one-on-one way. And so it's the ability to be challenged, to accept that. And I think if you go in as a mentor thinking you have all the answers, then you're not going to necessarily have it as a satisfying experience. That if I see it as a way to hone your own problem solving skills, a way to widen your view of the world. I love being asked tricky questions, which, particularly if I don't necessarily know the answer, sends me off to find some information about it, never necessarily the answer. But I think for me, that's the satisfaction comes from it, is that it expands my world. And, you know, there are sometimes I will, you know, being a mentor isn't about providing advice in a way, you know, it's about providing information, giving an option, a direction that somebody can choose to pick up on or not. And I think, and I see it in the other way as well. You know, I get a lot out of the relationships. I will often go back and ask the same things, and particularly when the age gap is broader. So I'm now in my mid-50s. I started mentoring probably when I was in my mid-30s. Now I'm mentoring, I tend to be mentoring people who basically could be my children had I chosen to have them. So there's a generational gap. So I learn a hell of a lot out of that process as well. And that's where the joy comes for me.
Alison, can I just follow up on that quickly before we go back to Sonia? Do you think that that age gap is actually significant? Because, I mean, I was always fascinated years ago to see some research that the way that students relate to people who are in positions of authority, teaching positions over them, changes according to the age gap. And the closer the gap, basically the closer the relationship, and then it becomes more and more distant as you get to the age where you could be their parents. Have you noticed a shift there or any kind of difference at all?
So I've also mentored people who are older than me, due to the fact that they're moving into an area or a field that they don't have a background or experience in, but they identified that I could help them, or, you know, be a sounding board in that. I think it depends. So for me, it's not I guess it's not necessarily the age gap as much as the technology is actually the big thing for me. And because I also, when I came into architecture, so I'm not a mentor for somebody who wants to know how to climb the ladder in the architecture profession, because I've never been in the profession in that way. What I bring to a mentoring relationship is something quite different, which is about how to live a wild and exciting life and not get arrested. And so, not quite, don't quote me on that. So I think for me, it's actually about, so for me, it was actually stepping in, and it was about, it was a technological gap, probably more than an age gap. So it was around and so the generation was a technological generation. So it was about learning new ways of doing things that I wasn't, didn't learn as part of my education. But at the same time, I was then able to provide a context for something, because I did live through something, or, I experienced something which has led to a technological change, but the people I'm mentoring have only known the now, not the then. Does that make sense? So, but I also think it depends on how you approach that relationship. So if you are, a generation older than the person you're mentoring, and you treat them like they are a child, then that has an impact on the relationship, obviously. Whereas if what you're doing is being inquisitive about each other's reality, I think it changes the dynamic.
Sorry, I took away from Sonia's turn, and you were talking about the benefits of being a mentor. Yes,
I'm just interested to know about personal experiences, but also because it's, we need to build up arguments for people to become mentors as much as anything.
Sure. I'll try to use an analogy, and I'm not very good at this, so bear with me. Look, as architects, the excitement we feel, one of the biggest excitements we feel, is when we see the impact that our creations have on the people who live in them, the people who use them. That's probably our biggest high, way more than the photographs or the awards, how the people, how that impact appears on their lives. And mentoring is the easiest way to create impact, because you do it one person at a time. So it is at a scale that is completely doable. In fact, so much easier than delivering a building, isn't it? But also you do it with truth and connection and love, which is all the things that, we humans are hardwired to do. So that to me is the biggest takeaway, that you can impact a life so quickly and so easily, and generally in a positive way, and shape the course of that. So that same high that we get from buildings, you can get from mentoring someone.
More quickly. I wonder if Dasha would like to make your comment, which is a really good one. Dasha, where are you, Dasha? I'm looking for you.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Hi. It's kind of less of a question than a comment, but would you like to say it?
Yes. So I'm from Serbia originally. I am now doing my PhD at Monash, and I am there. I have been involved for many years, and I am also on the board of the local mentoring community. It's called Creative Mentorship, and it is for people who work in creative industries, mostly younger generation, and then we are connecting them with people who are in the industry, so architects, but also artists, librarians, so many people who are trying to do good things. And I think, yes, so I myself had also younger mentors than me, and we found in our program that this thinking about age is actually one of the biggest barriers that there is about finding a mentor or being a mentor. So we can learn from people that are younger than us or older than us, and we can also focus our mentorship on different areas of our work or life, or what Alison mentioned about technology or not, or whatever. And we can have them for a year or for a few months or something. But now when you gave me the word, the power of the word, I'll just use it to also say that I think that maybe one of the biggest barriers in being a mentor, what we found through our program, is the lack of support for mentors. Because people, not only mentees need support in and empowerment to become mentees, but also mentors.
Mm.
Can I just jump in with one more point that I just remembered for that question? One real benefit of being a mentor is that you, as you're mentoring, you look back on your decision making over the years. And there is a lot of decision making that happens, you know, on the spur of the moment or et cetera, et cetera. But you look back on that decision making differently. And more importantly, you realize your patterns, you know, of decision making, some positive, some not so great. But it's really important to realize those patterns and to learn that, because to be honest, most of us are blind to our own patterns, positive and negative. And to me, mentoring has been a great self-reflection on those patterns over the years.
Mm.
Alison, I wonder if we could pick up on Dasha's point there about the support needed for mentors, and I wonder if you might talk to that briefly about the kinds of support that are important.
I agree totally, Dasha. It is an issue. When I was at the institute, we ended up actually having a program where some of our mentors mentored the mentors. So we had some mentors who only agreed to come onto the program if they themselves could be mentored through that process. We also had some mentor only events. So most of the formal events were for the mentors and mentees to come together, but we used to have at least one during the program where it was just for the mentors to come and discuss that. I would also play a role where if any mentors had an issue, I would be the person on the end of the phone. Interestingly, as someone who's now mentored for many years, I have never formally been a mentee. I have never had a formal mentor, which is why, for me, I actually think it's incredibly important. I think I have very few regrets other than bad haircuts in my life, but I think I may have made some different life decisions if at particular points I'd had the opportunity to have someone that I could use as a sounding board or I could go to with some specific questions. On reflection, I've had a lot of informal mentors, and there's key people I will seek out, but it's never been a formal thing. And I think, yeah, I do think one of the key reasons people are hesitant to become mentors is that thing about, well, where do I get the support from? So I think some of the best mentors are themselves have mentors.
Mm.
Yeah.
Sorry, just
Sonia, have you been mentored?
I actually have been a mentee, yes. A formal mentee through the constructive mentorship program in the AIA. It changed my life, literally. I will just share a bit about that experience. I was at one of 3 moments in my career where I have wanted to walk away from architecture at that point. As a mentee, I was lost, but I was very open about being quite lost. I had just had my first child. She was 18 months old, and I could not see how architecture and parenthood could be reconciled. I'm not sure if Maria's here, but Maria Danos was my mentor, and she still continues to be a mentor. And what I learned from that experience was that it's okay to be afraid, in sense of it's okay to be afraid of where your place in architecture is. It's okay to not know instinctively what your next step is. But if you communicate that with, of course, putting pride aside, if you communicate that honestly, all of that to your mentor, what you get is the best investment in the best advice. Because it was only when I did that, that the mentoring relationship really took off. And yeah, that literally changed my life. I went into that relationship thinking, perhaps I want to do this. And then once I laid it all out on the table, Maria and I just kept having conversations. And before I knew it, I found a spring in my step to take a step, and I landed up somewhere else completely different, which I'm super happy with.
But I wonder, I might sort of push a little further on this question of whether, actually, in a moment, we'll come back to Zamane's question, but what is the role of the mentor, like fundamentally speaking? Is it, Alison, you've just said it's not about advice. And I've heard the same thing, that in fact it's actually can be problematic if mentors are providing advice or direction, and that's really not their role, but their role is to ask the right questions to enable the mentee to come to their own conclusions about what is right for them. And definitely offer information about context and alternative understandings of what exactly has gone on when that incident occurred, and what the other people in the room were thinking. So these are questions about the expectations of mentor and mentee relationships. Do you want to expand on that, Zamane?
Hello. Yes, so one of the, so I've been mentee and mentor, and I'm in my early 30s. And one of the challenges that I found was I found that the expectation in the mentor-mentee relationship wasn't really clear, even through the programs that's been organized by, for example, NWAIC, like, which, you know, they've been doing this for years. And that is about, like, usually I found like one person is just giving, as you said, advice to the other person, and that really undermined the position of mentee. And really didn't result in a strong relationship between mentor and mentee, because someone was God and that person knew everything, and the other person was supposed just to learn, which to me is basically limiting the capabilities and growth opportunities of your mentee, because we don't want to be the same person as our mentor. We want just to explore our capabilities and potentials through that relationship, and also help to build a relationship. And I often see that's a one-way relationship. I mean, I'm not saying that all my experience was like that. I had great mentors, and I have tried to like mentor as well. Still I'm learning. I'm not that experienced in that mentor relationship. But that's something that I think, I mean, in my experience, it could have been better if we clarified that expectation at the start of the program, like informal programs or even informal ones. Another matter that I just want to note here, and I don't know if it's the right time to talk about it, is I have applied for a few mentee programs, so me being a mentee, and the result was that I have been assigned to have mentors, and the mentors had like less experience than I had, and interestingly, they were male. So yeah, I'm interested to understand, like in these programs that you are running, how you manage that, because it was, I mean, I raised that to to the leader of that program, like, what was your like selection criteria, because that person has less working experience, and like from what I have now, so I don't know why you have chosen that person as a mentor for me. I'm not talking about years of experience. I'm talking about even the scale of projects and involvement that you have on in the industry, and what you want to get out of that mentor-mentee relationship. So I'm interested to know the panel's experience on that topic as well. Thank you.
Alison, do you want to talk to some of the challenges of pairing people and setting those expectations? Yep.
So that was often the most challenging part of the program at the Institute, because and I don't know, I should premise this by saying, while I know that the Institute of Architects is still doing a mentoring program, I don't know if it's run in the same way that it was run when I was there. So I can't speak for what it looks like now. But certainly we had quite a stringent program in terms of applicants, both from the mentees and the mentors, had to fill in quite an extensive application form that identified both what their levels of experience and expertise were, but also what they were looking for in a mentor. And they could initially it was always female, so it was all you would always get a female mentor. When we got to the point where we were bringing in male mentors as well, we made people identify whether or not they were specific about who their mentor was in terms of the gender. But sometimes we would pair people up who on one level may not appear to not appear to be an obvious mentor-mentee relationship. And I was quite clear about this, was that sometimes some mentees would come and say, well, I don't want to go with that mentor because, and it would either be, because they scare me, or because they don't have what I've said I wanted, which is, I want a senior director in a large firm. And I would actually be quite provocative in my responses to mentees in that context. And I would often ask that they meet at least once, if not more than once, before they came back to me with a reason why they didn't think the relationship worked. Because sometimes one of the best things a mentor can do is take you outside of your comfort zone. And that often means being paired with someone who you wouldn't automatically think was a natural fit. But I think it's the relationship which is key to it. So you can have all the formal structures in a mentoring program that you like, but if you don't get on, it's never going to work. If there's not, and you don't even necessarily have to like the mentor-mentee, but you need to respect them, and you need to acknowledge that they have something to bring, both as a mentee and as a mentor, to the relationship. Now, if both sides can't do that, then it's not going to work. And I think the other thing is about the ability to be able to acknowledge that as well. So I've had situations where I had people come back and say, I remember one in particular, which was a woman, relatively recent graduate, but she had been out in practice, and she was quite specific about what she wanted in a mentor. But what was interesting was when we matched her with an older man from a particular area of practice, which matched what she said she wanted in some cases. But then she came back and she said, actually, that's not what I need, because that person wasn't actually her father, but her father was an older male architect from that same scale of practice. And she, I think, realised that she'd asked for the wrong thing, because she suddenly went back, actually, that person can give me, I can get that stuff from my father. I realise I need something else. But it took the process for her, going through the process, to realise that she'd asked for the wrong things. So then she had to go back and ask for something else. So I think the big thing is about being clear from a mentee about what you're looking for in a mentoring relationship. Because sometimes you can get it in one conversation. It doesn't necessarily need to be an ongoing formal conversation. It may actually be that you sit next to someone on a plane, not that we do that anymore, but you might be sitting, you may realise that the person next to you on the plane, if you're brave enough, ask them the question, they may actually have, that's a mentoring relationship. But yeah, so it is difficult, and it does need to be done carefully, I think. And that's the challenge with formal mentoring programs, is ensuring the right mix. But I like to think that the Institute's program, certainly when I was there running it, we had a fairly good success rate in terms of matching, but we did a lot of stringent vetting, if you like, and that was through written applications, and often I'd get on the phone and talk to people. But yeah, I think it's very important to get the correct mix.
I wondered if we might throw to Alex Duncan, who has a good point about mentoring at different career stages.
Sure. Yeah, I haven't been fortunate enough to have a formal mentoring situation in my career. I certainly didn't have anything when we left uni. I feel like I'm in my late 30s now. It wasn't really a thing when I was graduating. And over the course of my experience, there have been a few times where I feel like life has just pushed me into certain directions. I spent a lot of time living and working overseas in architecture, and have found that in the course of having a child and the career implications for that, it would have been really helpful to have somebody to talk about, like, okay, these are the issues that I'm having, or like, what do I do with my life, for example. That would be really helpful to just chat about generally, from somebody who has been in the industry and has encountered, I'm sure, difficulties, but also had positive results in some cases, and just, you know, words of wisdom to not someone who's my 20-something-year-old self would be helpful. And it does seem that there is a lot of focus on the emerging student, but that's not where your life decisions end. Yeah.
Can I just jump in here? But something I've seen in a lot of my mentees, even though they're students, I don't think that changes, because I made some of those same mistakes as a mentee. There was a lot of assumption on my part that I was there to listen. And surprisingly, I walked away from each interaction having spoken 8 words to every 1 word Maria said, because a good mentor asks you 6 questions back to every single question you ask them. And if you don't, yeah, maybe they're not the mentor for you, because the number one thing I get from students are very prosaic questions. For example, you know, how do I do this? When I ask them why, that leads to something else. And then I go, but why do you think that way? That leads to something else. And before you know it, the conversation has taken a complete different right turn, but they have got something really concrete at the end of it. But if I hadn't asked those questions back, and it was the same with Maria, if she hadn't gone, but why are you seeing it this way? What is making you think this way? And then you share the next experience. It's actually so much more on the mentee to do the talking and not the listening. And the other thing I would say is I often get very frustrated when mentees come to a mentoring session, and I ask them to give me just a bit of heads up on, you know, what are the questions they have in their mind. I often won't get questions. This is just based on this year's mentoring experience, which is, you know, online, and the Institute one, because we've paused our own mentoring program this year. COVID, all that. So there is, sometimes there's no preparation before the meeting, just a vague idea of 1 or 2 questions. But if you do your homework, you get a lot more out of the session. So don't expect to come there and listen. Expect to do a lot of the talking. So do a lot of the thinking so you can come and do the talking.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with that, Sonia. And also it seems to me that a successful mentor-mentee relationship is when the mentee comes out and says, well, I sort of knew the answer to my own question, but I had to come to it by articulating it in words, which in itself is quite a powerful thing to do, but also by being asked the right questions.
That's
so,
right.
You know, it doesn't help you come.
They say it themselves. The wisdom comes from their own mouths.
Exactly. I wondered if Prani Hodges has a question for the whole group. Where are you, Prani? Or I could ask the group. The question is, of the people here, how many of us have experienced a mentoring relationship, whether formal or informal? I mean, how common is it? How would we do this?
Can you do that thing where you put your hand up or something?
You can. It's the, what is it called? It's called responses or something.
Reactions.
Yeah. Okay. So if you've been a mentee in a formal mentoring relationship, put up your finger or something. Okay. So quite a few people. About half-ish. Yes. And what about if you've been a mentor? Yeah. Similar kind of proportion. So it's pretty widespread. I mean, I don't know, Prani, whether you know, whether you want to comment on that, whether that's a surprise to you.
Her microphone's not working.
Oh, okay, no worries. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Sonia or Alison, do you want to comment on how widespread these things are?
Look, I think there is a real dearth of mentors. out there. Students say to me all the time. I think what often happens is, and I'm seeing that in some of the questions and the comments, that yes, there's that big leap from school to the profession, but there's a lot of bumps in the middle of the road. And often, I don't know how else to explain it. The people who probably have the lived experience to share their knowledge on those bumps are so busy still navigating those bumps that they haven't even in their heads wrapped their head around, oh, I have something to share. They're just in survival mode. And that's what I would call myself before we started this program with Michael. I was just in survival mode. So even though I had things to share, the headspace wasn't there. But now that I've started it, I can see the impact, of course, on the other person and myself. So it's, to me, this is going to be a part of my life going forward, regardless.
I wonder, I mean, we're kind of coming close to the end of our time, but I wonder whether either of you would like to comment on the distinction, and maybe it's just semantics, between mentors, sponsors, and coaches. So, you know, there's this distinction is sometimes made between mentors and sponsors, where a sponsor is the person who introduces you to people who can help you in your career, or who gives you commissions, or who is your referee for jobs, which is not necessarily the same as the role of a mentor. And a coach, of course, is a paid person who is usually much more structured and puts you through a process towards specific pre-stated goals. I mean, what is your position on these distinctions?
Microphone.
Sorry, microphone. So I think you've actually defined them quite well, Naomi. I have always said to people that I've been in a formal mentoring role with is that while I am their mentor, not to expect that I would introduce them to jobs. I'm not their sponsor. It's a very different thing. And I think coaching is, again, very different. You know, coaching is, as you say, it's often paid, it's often very structured, all those things. I touched on this before with a comment about the person sitting next to you on the plane. I think one of my pieces of, you know, my learnt experience around mentoring is that now, you know, had I realised at different points in my life the value of just asking a question and not being afraid of being seen to be stupid or not knowing something. I define ignorance as a lack of knowledge. It's not a lack of intelligence. And so I would encourage anybody to seek out informal mentoring. If you can't access formal mentoring, then to seek out informal mentoring by you know, being brave enough to simply ask a question. Sometimes it's about asking someone to have a coffee to mull over something. Sometimes it's asking someone a simple question that you're interested in their response to. So I think mentoring can be a much more equal relationship than say a sponsor or a coach, because there are times when people who you're the mentor for can at other times become your mentor, depending on what the situation is. You know, there are times when we all have different things to offer and bits of experience to offer to other people at different points. And I think so long as, and I'd had conversations through formal processes with people who had come wanting to be a mentee. So I've had people come to me asking, would I mentor them? And I've said no, based on what they were wanting. I said, no, I'm not your mentor. I'm not the person for you. I can't give you what you're seeking. And I think that somebody who is seeking a mentor, the first thing you need is to know why, and then you figure out how to get it. It's the why that's on your ass. It's like you need to ask yourself the why, and then go and then figure out the how once you've answered the why. But it's much more fluid in the nature of what the relationships look like, and also it differs at different times in life and for different reasons. You could have 3 or 4 mentors on the go at the same time because you need different things from different people. And similarly, you know, I've had relationships where I've mentored different people for different reasons at the same time. sorry, that's my husband upstairs making noise. I hope it's not coming on the mic. So I think I see a mentoring-mentee relationship as much broader than either a sponsor relationship or a coaching relationship. But I also see it as a much more equal. It goes both ways, much more. I guess that's, yeah.
I wonder if we can just talk quickly about the idea of informal mentoring, because I think a lot of what we've been talking about are quite formal programs. So I wonder if you might talk a little bit about informal mentoring, and I think that's where you'll get what you were talking about then, Alison, is for those who don't have access to a formal program but are kind of interested in developing some informal mentoring networks. I mean, what sort of advice would you give, other than know what you're looking for? I mean, how would you suggest someone sort of initiates that kind of relationship?
I think you need to be brave. It's the first one. Identify that that's what you're actually looking for. But then in things like, so if it's mentoring within the context of your profession, then I would suggest doing things like going along to, you know, a great place to start is going along to CPD events. So you're going and you're going and you'll be in a space where everyone is seeking the same information. And there could be people in the room who've got more knowledge than you. You could also attempt, you know, if whoever's presenting is a good presenter at the time, be brave and go up afterwards and ask them some questions, see how it goes. I think one of the big things is in an informal mentoring context is to not have huge expectations, to go, I have one question. This is my question. If something comes from it, something comes from it. If that person is unable to respond, don't take it personally. I think that's the other thing. And remember that everybody's got their own realities. So if somebody knocks you back, it's not necessarily about you. It's about, you know, there may be a whole lot of stuff happening in their lives. And I think, but I do encourage people to seek out informal mentoring. The other thing is to do things like, I mean, I've read some amazing stories about people who reach out to, you know, writers, journalists, authors, you know, that they read something that clicks for them, and then instead of going, oh, I wonder what that person would think about such and such, and not going any further with it, they actually write them a letter and say, you know, I really liked what you said about this, I'm interested in what you said about that. You may not get an answer, but you might. So it's that thing about being brave. So identifying the questions that you want, being brave, and also realizing that there's probably not going to be one person who can answer all the questions, that there's a range of different places you can go for different questions, and that different people will have different answers. So you might go, well, I've got this question. Instead of going to one person, you reach out to a range of different people. And, you know, hopefully the responses from most of them will be to ask a question back. Because I agree absolutely with what Sonia was saying, is that, you know, the best mentors are the ones who actually support you in answering your questions yourself. That may be about giving you directions to resources or things, or asking a direct question, but basically they're putting the onus back on the mentee to answer it. So, you know, one good way of doing it is to ask the same question to 6 different people and then see what you get, basically. I mean, there's a whole range of doing it, but, you know, it can be, you know, it can be just minor interactions can sometimes have the biggest impact, you know. So, yeah. And it's about being brave to actually put yourself out there is the first step.
Yeah, there's so much I agree with what Alison said. I actually have a list of informal mentors who don't even know they're my informal mentors. So as I said, Michael and I get around a lot, and you've got, pre-COVID, you know, you have all these arty events where there are all these fantastic brains hanging around, because at some point there's either coffee before or after or something. And you ask them a question here, a question 6 months later. They don't even know they're my informal mentors, but some of the things they've told me in the space of those 3 minutes, I have held onto in the darkest of times because XYZ, you know, said so. So I agree. It's often we think mentoring you know, we instantly, there is a tendency to want to formalize it very quickly. That tends to scare people off. Informal mentoring is as short as a 5-minute conversation, but on a question you have given a lot of thought to. So the idea being, in those Aki gatherings, when I've spotted the person that I really want to ask this person this question, I go up to them, swallow my nervousness down, and just ask them the question. There's no commitment from them that I'm going to see them again in 2 weeks or 2 months. And often I get the most frank answers that are honestly shocking. But yeah, I've got mentors who don't even know they were informal mentors. That's how bite-sized it can be. But in order to effect that, in some senses, you can have a list in, you know, at home or in the back of your mind, but you actually have to think of those questions before you even meet and have those interactions. And then when the opportunity arises and you're doing small chat about something else, go, oh my God, in light of what you just said, you would be the perfect person to ask that burning question that I've been thinking about. But you've got to have that list of burning questions done. You know, whether it's on Friday, 9 p.m. after 2 glasses of wine when you're feeling really brutally honest, doesn't matter, but just write it down somewhere just so that it's in your mind. And when opportunity strikes, you just go. And it's one question.
That was a beautiful spot on which to conclude, Sonia. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very beautifully articulated. Justine, do you want to talk about next week?
No, because I don't know what's happening next week, but we will have one of these next week.
Very good. And it will be fabulous.
I've got lots of things in mind, and I'll talk to you about that later, Naomi, but we will definitely have one. I just don't know who or what yet. So,
And you will kill it.
If anyone's got any burning questions, as Sonia has said, or fabulous ideas, please chuck them in the chat.
Yes. Or if anyone wants to do one of these, get in touch. I've got to say, I'm on the speaker view, but today I've been on the little mosaic view, and I'm so happy to see so many people here, some of which I think of as some very old friends, some good friends, some new people. I'm very happy to see you all. And I guess my question is, as I said at the start, Parla's often asked about mentoring and if we have a mentoring program, and we don't partly because to do a formal mentoring program, as Alison and Sonia have suggested, is a huge amount of resources and the care of matching people, and we've just never had the capacity to do that. But I am very conscious that we have an extraordinary network of people that's only growing the more we do these events, the more we do. We have that Parla guide to mentoring, which we wrote a few years ago, which I think is still quite helpful. Alina was asking in the chat about other kinds of mentoring resources, and I think that's something that my colleague Susie and I will try and put together.
Hold on, Justine. I thought the Parla salons are your informal mentoring sessions anyway.
Well, they are, but I guess where I'm trying to get to is, are there enough programs around already, or is there something that Parla could do, and I don't know quite what that thing is, that might provide a framework to facilitate more informal mentoring relationships. So I guess what I'm just doing a bit of market research here right now is to know if people think there's enough out there. We can't run a formal mentoring program unless someone gives us a vast amount of money to set that up, which I can't see happening. But I think there are probably other things that we could do to facilitate. I don't know. I'm just talking now, really. So look, I guess what I'm saying is, if you think it would be a helpful thing for us to investigate further, please let me know. You can send me an email, you can put something in this chat right now, although I guess we're about to go, but I'm just kind of interested to test the water, because I feel there's something we could do that's in between a formal program and what we do now, which is set up events where we hope people will get together and have a chat.
Well, thank you very much to our two wonderful speakers who have been fantastic, Sonia Sarangi and Alison Cleary. And it was a really interesting session. As always, I wish we could have continued. Thank you, Justine. Thank you, Monash Architecture and Hope in particular. Is there anything else to say, Justine, other than please join us next week, same time, same channel?
No, I think that's it. Actually, for the graduates and students out there, last Monday we had our first session called Midday Monday, which is specifically, or was it today? Was it this week? It was this week. This Monday we had our first one specifically aimed at grads and students. It's led by students. And it's really just putting people into Zoom breakout rooms, and they catch up. It's run by Sarah Mayer and Bronwyn Main. It was really successful, and I think we're looking at doing it fortnightly. So for anyone who's not a recent graduate, it's not for you. It's not for me either. But if you are in that demographic, please have a look out for that next one of those, because I think, again, it's a great way to sort of build networks, and we're particularly interested in people meeting across the country, given that Zoom allows us to do that. So we're 3 minutes over time.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.